We're going to get straight into it. I'm not going to have another talk right before I introduce the next talk. So you're going to go from one introduction straight into another introduction. So leading straight off, I'd like to ask Claire Mahony to join me up here. Claire is the Chief Operating Officer at the Zero Net Emissions Agriculture Cooperative Research Center, or the ZNE Ag CRC, which is an Australian initiative accelerating practical solutions for low emissions agriculture. She previously served as the Managing Director at Ceres & Co. and Head of New Ventures and Innovation for AACO, the Australian Agriculture Company, working with early stage ventures across climate tech, ag tech, primarily in the beef industry. Claire brings a deep expertise on carbon markets for livestock producers, spanning insetting, offsetting, regulated and voluntary markets. Please help me welcome Claire Mahony.
Right, thank you, Charles. Appreciate that introduction, and it's lovely to be back. So thank you for the invite. So as Charles said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Zero Net Emissions in Agriculture CRC. Last year, Richard Heath, our CEO, spoke, so I'm very pleased to be back and able to reflect on our funding model, which is the topic of the session, and to talk a little bit about our progress over the last 12 months. So the purpose of our CRC is to reduce emissions in Australian agriculture. We aim to do this by developing practical and scalable solutions that allows producers and farmers to reduce emissions, but also improve productivity and protect natural resources. Our funding model is typical of cooperative research centres, or CRCs. So CRCs have been part of the Australian government's strategy for innovation for more than 2 decades. And they require collaboration right from the beginning. So a bid is formed with partners from industry and universities, and it's typically led by a university. And you then take that bid to the federal government, and if you're successful, the federal government matches the amount of money committed by those industry partners. So then you end up with a collaboration of industry and commercial organisations, various universities all around Australia, and then state government departments, state and federal, government departments. We are Australia's largest CRC, and we have access to approximately $300 million when you count the in-kind contribution from our partners. So this has been formed from, we're at about $81 million from partners at the moment, so there is a little bit of shift, and I'll talk to that a little bit more when I talk more about the current state of affairs. But the $87 million pledged from the federal government remains the same, and it's a 10-year program, so it does enable longer-term research to occur. These are our current partners, so there's 72. The different tiers determine how much they contribute to the CRC. So Tier 1 partners contribute $300,000 per year, and some of our Tier 4 partners only contribute in kind and not cash. And then Tier 2 contribute $150,000 a year, and Tier 3 $75,000 a year. There's a lot. Not all cooperative research centres have this many partners, but as I said, it was a large bid, and consequently, we're very fortunate to have all the state government ag departments and some significant industry partners in there that help keep us very industry focused. So the problem we're trying to address is emissions. So agriculture contributed between 12 and 20%, depending on the year, over the last 10 years to greenhouse gas emissions in Australia, and 77% of that was methane. So hence why this summit is very relevant to us and our work. So what's changed in the last 12 months? Well, we spent some time analysing what we call the enabling environment, which is, I'll talk to you a little bit more in terms of a diagram, but includes government policy and supply chain trends and where funding is being channelled. But some of the key things that are impacting us in this last 12 months is the introduction of mandatory reporting by the Australian government or climate-related financial disclosures. So the larger companies in Australia are now reporting, including reporting on their Scope 3. Last year, the federal government released the Ag and Land Sector Plan, which is one of the sector plans in their larger plan for achieving net zero by 2050. They also funded the Carbon Farming Outreach Program Tranche 2. So that's a nationwide training program. It's a train the trainer concept as opposed to direct to landholders. So it trains agronomists and other advisors who then will engage directly with their local, regional producers. We're also seeing quite a lot of changes in corporate signalling. So companies stepping back from their SBTI or targets and the impact that that's having with supply chains and drivers for emissions reduction. All right, so this is a map of our enabling environment. We do call it the horrendogram, yes. I'll focus on those green boxes in a moment. But so the green boxes are the different segments of the ecosystem. The blue boxes are actual organisations, and then the yellow boxes are actual R&D programs that have been funded. So just zooming in then a little bit to the ecosystem, the core sort of segments there, and to talk a little bit about funding flows and what we're seeing. So if we look at investment in, I think we're seeing a challenging environment for startups. I reviewed some data just coming over here on climate tech VC deals, there being a lower number of deals, but a fairly stable value, which indicates sort of a trend towards later stage investment. We engage with all of these organisations. I think a difference I see between Australia and the US is that we probably don't engage with the philanthropy segment as much as what I see in the US. What we are seeing, so there has also been reductions in government funding and grant programs in Australia in general. We are not as impacted by that because the 10-year commitment was made and that's in place, so that will not change. What is changing for us are partner contributions, and so those 72 partners, they can leave and others can come in, and so I'm sort of at the coalface of that engagement, and new partner conversations are tough. So it's a lot more challenging for them to get that internal buy-in and executive or board approval because there's just a lot more questions around where money is being spent. One other trend I'm seeing is that those parties, there is a big focus on mandatory reporting, and so whole of farm accounting and other aspects, and I think that's taken focus away a little bit from direct technologies, considering whether they will purchase or won't, or at what time they might invest in direct technologies. So how is that impacting our research programs? I would say there is a little bit more focus, certainly from our industry partners, on what we call Program 3 and 4, so the whole farm mixed enterprise systems. So that's led by Dr. Richard Eckhart, is our program lead in that one, and then delivering value from net zero. So that's where our, I'll talk a little bit soon about our in-setting roundtable project. So there's projects like that in that program which are of interest. That's led by Dr. Marek Krat from UWA. We still, though, have a lot of investment in Program 1 and 2 and quite long-term investment and a lot of commitments that have already been made to our projects on low emissions plant solutions led by Vicky Lane and our low methane livestock program, which was led by Dr. Sam Clark now. So just also on our funding model there, that is an example of our secondment model where we second in those researchers. Does that mean I'm out of time, Charles? So all of our projects are online on our website. So I just thought I'd touch on these three that might be of interest. So tools to measure methane emissions, including MIR, which was interesting to hear Mike talk this morning, a very large genetics programs on selecting for methane efficient cattle with some really good measurement happening in beef, and also our in-setting roundtable. So a lot of interest in co-claiming in a supply shed and demonstration of that by AACO, and Athian is involved in that project. And really quickly, we do have producer demonstration sites as well, spread across Australia, and we do work like publish Pathways to Net Zero, which is focused on to landholders and producers. We have a conference on the 18th to the 20th of August in Perth in Australia, so I'd love to see any of you there, and love to talk more later on any of those projects if you'd like to find me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Claire. Next, I'd like to invite up Hayden Montgomery. Most of you know Hayden. Hayden serves as the Agricultural Program Director for the Global Methane Hub, working to reduce methane emissions in agriculture. Previously represented the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases, promoting international research for mitigation solutions. From 2013 to 2016, Hayden served as New Zealand's ambassador to Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And I will say I've had the pleasure of working with Hayden for quite a few years now. He's better in person than he is on paper. I don't know what to say.
Not quite sure how to interpret that one. Thank you. And I see I've got 8 minutes, so this will be a challenge. Where do I push the buttons? There we go. So the first headline, enteric fermentation is the largest source globally. So it represents a very big focus for the agriculture program within the Global Methane Hub, which, to say very quickly, is we're a re-granter primarily. We have approaching 50 funders that we then, on their behalf, make grants into agriculture, waste and energy. And I have the privilege and the challenge of managing the agriculture program. Now, the next point I wanted to make is, of course, not just one animal that looks the same everywhere. It's a huge diversity of production systems that we have to grapple with in the different climatic zones of the world, the different farming systems, the dairy versus the beef versus the fibre, etc. So all of that in mind as we think about how we use the resources we have at our disposal and have the maximum impact we can, thinking about the source of emissions globally, not just constrained to one particular geography. And the next slides are a little bit risky, but I'm going to proceed. It's like an artist's interpretation of, I'll go back. It's very slow to respond. This is like sort of an artistic interpretation, and just use it as an illustration of how we think about where to focus most of our work and what kind of focus we should have in those different geographies. And this is meant to just demonstrate a couple of things together. One is the scale of emissions from different geographies, and then a little bit about the, let's say, the relative efficiency in general terms, right, sort of averages of those emissions. So to take an example, Brazil, India, Ethiopia, United States, large emissions as a total, but of course, on average, we see very different levels of productivity and efficiency, which would represent methane emissions intensity as well. And so these sorts of insights help us think about where we should focus and what sort of thing we should be prioritizing today. I'm having trouble getting the next. There we go. So this is the same for cattle and buffalo milk, right? Same idea. It's like, where are the predominant sources of emissions? But what about those emissions do we also want to understand? And I'll get on to the relevance of this in terms of our grant making in the next slides. And what I want you to leave here, if it's one thing, that GMH is not only the enteric fermentation accelerator. We have a program beyond that focuses a lot on what we call win-wins, right? So thinking very much about, as Rory said yesterday, good old animal husbandry and the contribution that can make to reducing emissions intensity in those regions where they would be represented on the left-hand side of this graph, which is just a dairy efficiency kind of plot, but it illustrates it for production in general. That we should start and optimize those systems first, and then think about the technology and bring those in later on. So that's kind of how we think about our program. And then to just give you a bit of an overview of the kinds of things that we're supporting, and I don't want to go into great detail on any of these today. Many of them will be spoken about in some way by other speakers here at this conference, but we're very interested in ration optimization so that animals are receiving their requirements first and foremost, and then thinking about the lowest cost, the lowest methane footprint that is created from a well-balanced ration in smallholder dairy systems across the different countries you can see represented. I don't know where to point this to make it work. Is it that way? Similarly, you might say it's analogous. It's how do we ensure in grazing systems animals are getting the requirements so they can be as productive as possible and achieve their yield potentials. And here we're harnessing remote sensing technologies, aiming to give near real-time information on standing biomass that would be available for animals to consume, and then that information forming decision support tools so that those people managing or advising those people managing grazing animals, which might be community grazed pastoralism or it might be single owner operator type systems, have the best information possible to optimize how they manage their animals in time and in space to reduce emissions intensity, achieve faster daily weight gain in those beef systems, for example. There we go. Animal health, another key lever for our program. We'll hear about this later on, but again, how can we reduce the incidence of disease, production diseases or other infectious diseases to avoid losses and increase production, reduce emissions intensity. And an area that we are about to start making grants in, if I can get there, is in heat stress management. So we all know that caloric stress on animals has a huge impact on productivity, even potentially mortality. So we want to also demonstrate the importance of that for the methane agenda. This is really, there we go. And then the next slides, I should have got rid of the animations, is really a critical piece of our program now. And this is about having these tools. How do we put those in practice on real farms in different contexts as packages of practices that would be the highest priority in those places, to combine feeding with health or genetics with feeding or heat stress management with feeding. Different combinations of practices that are deployed on real farms to get good information on what were the costs of implementing those things, what were the benefits beyond methane, understanding the methane impact we're having by implementing those things. And we really want to have insights as to the most impactful interventions, but also think about the farm level microeconomics. Like, does this work? Does it pay back? Can we create robust information that is not, I would say, theoretical in some way to say, if you do this, then we expect the following. Actually say we did it and we saw this. And we believe that that is going to be the most compelling information to convince policymakers, farmers, financial institutions, whether they be multilateral development banks or commercial banks lending into the rural sector, that these things pay back in a reasonable timeframe and therefore get the support. Hopefully you can read this and I'll move on to the next slide. So this is a really critical part of our work. And you would see that many of those interventions are correlated with the reddish colors on the previous charts, right? Where we know we can make a huge progress by raising productivity. And then just to speak very briefly on the kind of other piece of the side of the coin, I guess, is the innovation agenda. So that when production systems are reaching their yield potentials, when they are optimized, where health status is good, where animals are getting the nutrition requirements, what more can we bring into those systems to sink the lid on emissions? And that's the agenda that we, with funders from philanthropy, from governments and from private sector, are helping to deploy these resources in the strategy on the previous slide. Many of those things you've been hearing about here. And since 2023, we've been running this program and investing considerable sums in research. And there's more to do, of course, but we are very pleased with the breadth of projects that we have been able to support across the research agenda, but also geographically. You can see that it's not concentrated in just a few countries. There's a lot of people out there, very smart people working on lots of different disciplines that have been brought together to speed up progress. And then, thank you, someone's helping me. And then just to speak briefly about some of the priorities for us in the current year. Some you've heard about, so I won't spend a lot of time on those, but on the co-benefits of different interventions on production or on animal health, we're really, really keen to support work that can help to answer some of these really important questions that are likely to be some of the most important factors to drive adoption or not. The interaction between measures. So if we heard about genetics in the previous session, when genetics becomes mainstream, low methane genetics, I should say, what if we then have an inhibitor being put into the diet of those animals? Do we get the same response that we would expect to see, or do low methane phenotypes or genotypes have a different response to a different additive? And that's something that's really not been looked at much yet. Then on the microbial microbiology side, we're funding work already to help characterize and culture the microbes out there and get those into public collections available for research. But we want to also speed that process up and have it much more targeted to those key species of archaea or bacteria or other organisms that are most wanted by the research community, by the private sector who wish to develop solutions. So they have those bugs available for them to do pure culture work. The animal physiology was mentioned previously from a convening in London. That's a really important area that we've already funded some projects in and looking to do more. I think I'll take the hint and leave it there. This is for people who wish to make themselves known to us, to receive information about you as researchers, public or private sector. You can log your information and let us know about your existence. That's kind of the intent. So thank you for your attention. Yeah.
All right. And to wrap up the formal presentation piece before we jump into the panel, I'd like to invite my friend Ruth Leary. Let's see. I want to make sure I get Ruth's bio as correct as possible here. Ruth leads strategy engagement at AgriZero NZ, the public-private partnership accelerating methane mitigation tools for New Zealand's agriculture sector. She serves as a key connector between research, regulation, and on-farm practice, with a focus of bringing stakeholders' perspectives to New Zealand's regulators. Drawing on a strong background in agricultural systems and public sector engagement, she helps ensure mitigation solutions are scientifically robust and practically viable, something we've talked a lot about the past day and a half. So, Ruth, please.
We just say next, Charles. We don't need a clicker.
Oh,
apparently it's new magic. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me at the summit. I've been a couple of times and I have to say it's like Christmas for myself and my colleague Deborah, sitting over there at AgriZero, to be in a room with so many people keen to talk about methane. I've learnt the hard way outside of this room, it's not always quite the same. And it is a bit like Christmas, actually, but more like a family gathering as we come back and have these conversations. So I'm going to give you a quick update, and I look forward to them being on a panel with other speakers. So AgriZero, first of all, some of you may not have heard of us. Who are we? We're an investor, but actually we're a collaboration, a partnership between the New Zealand government and private sector businesses who are focused, given New Zealand's specific environment and real dominance in livestock agriculture relatively, on trying to invest to reduce emissions. So we are a partnership that invests in tools and technologies to reduce methane, but actually also nitrous oxide. So it's another conversation we'd like to have with some of you. We were set up really to, acknowledge that agriculture is 53% of New Zealand's footprint at the moment, not to get competitive clear with Australia, but really about protecting that competitive advantage and trying to make sure our farmers, given we're exporting, over 95% of our dairy products, well over 80% of our red meat offshore, we need to make sure we can meet the demands and the needs of our global customers and trading partners for sustainable, low emissions agricultural products. So what do we actually do? We take targeted investments and actions to try and accelerate the development and deployment of solutions. We work really closely with our partners actually at the Ag Emissions Centre. You heard from Sinead this morning. They're really focused on grants and supporting their early stage and foundational research. At AgriZero, we're more focused on trying to accelerate those commercial solutions down and then out of the pipeline and onto farm. So we invest venture capital mostly. We were set up with $191 million. So that was made up of the private sector committing and the New Zealand government matching that money dollar for dollar. We're just closing another funding round for the next 3 years, and I can confirm that there's really good sustained interest from both the public and private sector in New Zealand to keep working on the solution so we can get tools into the hands of our farmers. We do also have catalyst investments, so that's what Deborah, if you want to wave your hand around, feel free. That's really where we're looking across the landscape and going, what is slowing us down? Is there more system-wide investment we can make? So we're not granting, but we are investing sometimes at the early pre-seed stage when a solution is being worked on, but it's not quite ready or suited to a venture investment model. So we've just got about 5 slides. So I'm trying to show you on one slide our approach to what we're doing. In New Zealand, we're really focused, no surprise, on a pasture-based farming system. Our animals are outside grazing, even those that do get fed as a dairy cow, maybe twice a day in the shed, which over half of our cows now do. We really have to find solutions that actually fit into the farming system in New Zealand. So we're looking right across the portfolio and investing sometimes multiple times into what we class as a category of solutions. We have made about 12 investments into startups so far, where we've taken equity if they're working on a promising solution or set of solutions. And we're still looking. So, if you do have something interesting, we will probably make 4 or 5 more investments in the venture side and also see what other catalyst investments we can make to speed up. If you look at our portfolio, though, you see we're looking right across the farm system. We've got 5 different investments in the inhibitor space, and I know that there's some of our portfolio companies in the room, which is a great place to be meeting everybody, actually. So Agteria Biotech out of Sweden. We've got Ruminant Biotech, who you'll hear from at this conference, who have specifically developed a solution for pasture-grazed animals with a slow-release bolus. We have Ruminate, who are working on multiple delivery formats to suit both intensive but also extensive and grazed animals as well. We have Agreceutical Products, who are working on a feed supplement sourced from a botanical ingredient that can grow actually on the rolling hills where we graze our sheep in New Zealand. And also through Zoetis, there is a joint collaboration program with Ag Emissions Centre and AgriZero on a small molecule inhibitor. So that's been a program that's been running for some time, but showing some real promise with recent results. We do have 2 vaccine programs we're funding, so Archaea Bio, and I know some of that team are here, and the same with Lucidome Bios. Both are working on a methane vaccine, which for a system like New Zealand with relatively low-touch farming, if you've got extensively grazed animals, we see a vaccine as a really practical intervention to suit our farming systems. And hopefully, make a difference globally as well, given most methane, I think it's about 80%, does get burped out in more extensive environments. On the pasture side, we've got pasture-grazed animals. What better way to intervene in some way to reduce methane? We've invested in biolumic so far. This is a ryegrass project. That's the majority of the pasture grass in New Zealand is ryegrass. They are using a UV light treatment to naturally create, modify the trait, the genetic expression in the plant to increase the lipids and reduce the methane produced by the animal. We are still looking at many other pasture treatments as well. On the probiotic side, we have made 3 investments. Again, I know some of our portfolio companies are here. We find that principle really interesting. Can we modify the rumen naturally with probiotics and try and replicate, those low methane emitting animals and drive some production as well, drive more productivity? We are still looking, we have gaps in our portfolio. We're looking for more nitrous oxide solutions. We've made 1 investment so far. In New Zealand, the nitrous oxide, the dominant form of it, actually comes from urine patches on grass. So think about abating that. It's not that easy to reduce and intervene. But we have invested in a wearable device, which actually, if you think about concentrated urine patch with nitrogen in it, if you could spread that out, if you could then use that natural source of nitrogen as fertilizer, you can decrease leaching, you can decrease your nitrous oxide emissions as well. Genetics. We've heard about genetics today. I'm not a genetics expert, but absolutely, this is a way that farmers can continue farming without having to change practice, but actually selecting the genetics that can help drive down the methane reductions, and ideally coupled with other positive traits as well. So New Zealand has been working and have those low and high methane flocks that you've heard about, which are an amazing resource that we do have. And we've supported that low methane sheep program as well, and doing some interesting studies looking at the feed conversion efficiency relationship as well. We've invested in embryo, which really enables the acceleration of that genetic gain, and I think we'll be hearing from embryo later in the conference, and Paul is here to talk to anybody too. So that's, again, amazing for us to think about what could we do at AgriZero when our remit is to accelerate. That's what embryo really is about, accelerating genetic gain. I think I've gone right around the portfolio, but we're still looking, so please do come and see me. We do also have a group of farmers that we work closely with. As we've gone through, we've been operating 3.5 years now, we've realised how key it is to work closely with farmers and producers and hear from them. We have our assumptions about our farm system and what works, what really makes something fit for purpose and able to be adopted in New Zealand. So we get together with and have workshops with this group directly with the startups that we've invested in, have really good sessions and question and answer time. And, at our recent session, we were asking them, what are you thinking about in the emissions reduction now? What do you feel like as a New Zealand farmer in this space? What is slowing down? If you perceive that adoption isn't happening as fast as it could, what's slowing it down? What are the things that need to be unblocked? And you can see some of the feedback they gave. At the moment, not necessarily feeling the urgency, or not all farmers do. Sometimes the signals that they're receiving or things they read in the news may not make it seem so urgent. The fact that trust is really important, that trust and confidence of farmers in the solutions they're using. Methane, you can't see it. It's really hard to verify, and for a farmer to understand that they're making a difference sometimes when you can't actually visualize it. You have to rely on data and modelling. Financial returns for farmers, not always clear. The market is emerging and there's some interesting initiatives that we're really interested in getting into. But if it's not really clear and tangible yet for a farmer, that real pull from the farm level to drive adoption is quite challenging. And of course, practicality and farm system fit. that's super, super critical as well. Just on that adoption challenge, we have, that's been, there's a lot of, I'm pointing in the wrong direction, aren't I? We have just recently announced a new initiative last week at the New Zealand National Field Days. It's the biggest agricultural event in the Southern Hemisphere, and we were proud to have our ministers announce the Early Adoption Accelerator. So this is a new program that AgriZero will be administering and helping deliver. It's 51 million of co-funding from the New Zealand government to help drive the adoption and support the adoption onto farm of proven emissions reduction tools. So this is when they have come out of the pipe, but there's, maybe the market pull or the rewards and incentives aren't quite enough yet to really drive that uptake across the farm system. So it's to build the trust and confidence of farmers as well. There'll be demonstration events and activities, more data gathered during these accelerator commercial pilot trials as well. So we're really excited how that can work nicely with our Catalyst and our Ventures investment to then get the tools all the way through the pipe and onto the farm. I'm getting the signal from Charles, so I'm going to wrap up really quickly. Just ending this to show that we do every quarter release a one-pager document just to update you on where we're at, what we've invested in, how much money we've spent, how much we've committed, and the types of companies and tools and the type of livestock that those tools can be used with. Thanks heaps.
If I can invite Hayden and Claire back up to have a seat for this session. We've got about 20 minutes flat to get a few questions in and get your questions in as well. So please make sure they're updated. Use the Slido app so we can pilfer through them. All right. Before we open up the Slido app here, I have a couple of just specific questions for each of you, just to go down. Claire, right now, the CRC 1 year in, what do you think are the top line achievements and takeaways? 12 months down the line.
I think just getting projects started. So there's a lot of systems that have to be built on the fly as well as getting projects off the ground. So there are 14 projects that are fully contracted and funded. And so some of the early results that I think are fantastic include in our genetics program, actually getting some really good beef data showing similar things to what has been talked about, sort of that 20% difference in low and high methane animals. And probably the insetting roundtable, project 2 and the interest that we're seeing in that and how that's driving conversation about reward pathways.
Thank you. And Ruth, wanted to ask, I mean, AgriZero has been making investments in these technology space for a couple of years now. What's changed in the landscape from when you first started investing in these companies to how you're evaluating companies now? What's the delta? What do these companies need to do now that they didn't have to do before?
Certainly the raising environment feels quite different. Felt really competitive, and we were still learning, obviously, when we started off. And we were, battling for a place on the cap table quite a bit. I think now there's a lot more work to do to gather a sort of a cohort of co-investors together and support these companies. There seems to be some, trends in this investment space and in climate tech and agri-tech, and particularly in the methane space. We're committed for the long term, and that allows us to be really focused. Those who don't have that same focus as us, maybe haven't come forward. So it's really driving, I guess, the startups to be really disciplined in their reporting and what they're going to be doing with the funding that they're raising, those milestones that they're going to be hitting, and their approach to getting a product to market as well. There's also that whole co-benefit conversation that has appeared in the last 2-3 years. When we first started, it certainly was investing in something on the basis of it being an effective product to reduce methane was fine. That's good. We need those. Now there's a real drive to try and find other co-benefits as well. And I don't know if that should or needs to be a prerequisite requisite, but it certainly seems to be a trend that we've observed.
Thank you for that. And Hayden, you had mentioned, you kind of introduced the accelerator, but gave us a little bit larger picture look at I think the Global Methane Hub's agricultural program. But can you walk us through just a little bit, I guess, the scope of some of those, between the feed libraries, where they're being developed, how is that, and also what's on the docket outside of the accelerator in the agricultural program broadly?
Sure. Yeah. So some of this will be discussed during the next day and a half too, but I guess our intention was to fund things that are often challenging for others to fund for different reasons. And particularly public funding usually is very much funding for the country or territory in which that funder sits, whereas we know we need transnational efforts, right, to build large data sets. So with the resources we had available, for so long there has been a need to build better data, right, for feed libraries to inform ration balancing in the case of, say, more confined systems and smallholder dairy systems of South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Africa, etc. And when we look at those sorts of projects, we see that they serve multiple purposes. One is it's like essential information for producers, right, to be able to make better decisions. But when we look at the MRV discussion, like yesterday with Amable, the biggest constraints we see are lack of activity data, poor activity data. So we see these projects contribute to both information relevant for producers' decisions, as well as helping enrich the global data sets for the purposes of greenhouse gas inventories, the GLEAM models and everything else that often make a lot of assumptions because there's a lack of data. So that one example of the feed ration I've just mentioned is kind of how we approach the animal health, the grazing management. It's a similar idea. And then beyond that, we are really interested, kind of like the roundtable thing, we are really interested in helping unlock some of the kind of incentive pathways, the MRV frameworks, the accounting tools that are kind of not really catching up with the solutions. And where you might have interest finally, or actually have a solution available, then there's a barrier because, we can't account for it. So we're not going to fund the implementation, right? And we hear that from companies, like, if we can't count this in our SBTI, it's not going to rise to the top of the list for investment. So we're trying to help unlock some of those things as well. And then, some of the predominant accounting tools out there, that's one area. And then thinking of different models for value chain joint investment. So if we know that it's difficult to raise enough money to have something invested in on farm to change behavior on farm or implement a practice, can multiple value chain partners pull resources and implement that? And there are different models out there already, but I guess in general, we're trying to explore, are there other models that might work? Which ones might work best based on the different systems or solutions that are of interest, and just help generate evidence, right? Learnings for hopefully people to build on. Yeah.
Thank you. And there's, you had mentioned a piece in there which actually answers part of this next question that I'll pose to everyone to jump into. But, AgriZero, the Z&E Ag CRC, and then the work of the Global Methane Hub, looking at how can we induce or entice, break down the barriers to market access or the value within that market system. But looking at mechanisms that plan to incentivize farmers for adoption or provide the data so that they may feel comfortable adopting. How are you envisioning ensuring that adoption continues after those incentives are pulled?
That's a good question, Charles, and it's something we've thought about. The initiative I talked about, the Early Adoption Accelerator, part of the criteria for submitting an application for those projects is explaining the exit strategy to come out of that co-funding and be a sustaining product where farmers will continue to use it because it will be able to deliver benefits. Meanwhile, the market is maturing, and we're looking, like Hayden and Claire, you've both mentioned it, those co-claiming and co-funding within the value chain models are really important, particularly so in New Zealand, where, again, we have processors who are exporting, milk and meat, and they have SBTI targets. They need those within the value chain reductions to be accounted for. So how do we pull the parties together, including the end customer? We already do have some end customer incentives available for farmers in New Zealand, but they're not available for every farmer, and they're not big enough necessarily to drive wide-scale uptake across the farm system. But there is some farmers who might be getting 30 cents per kilogram of milk solids on top of their regular payment because they're delivering the lowest emissions milk to Fonterra, for example, or helping support Silver Fern Farms with their net zero carbon beef. But that is not the entire landscape. So we need to make sure we build on that. We make I guess, that awareness of what is that funding gap really crystal as well for people.
We certainly think about that in different ways, just how to drive adoption. One really key part of the CRC is the contribution of partners, and some of them being industry and commercial partners. So we hope to engage with more industry partners because they're the end user of technologies, products or management systems. We certainly see the need for reward pathways, and our conference this year, the theme is reward pathways. How that sort of, is operationalised is everything from direct projects like the insetting roundtable to thinking around how we would be part of developing methodologies or protocols for markets, and also how we support other programs of work. So in Australia at the moment, Meat and Livestock Australia are taking the lead on developing the new livestock method for the ACCI scheme, but there'll be a lot of support from the CRC with the research going into that and the committee members. So it's a real range. I do think that carbon markets are critical to how we drive adoption, and then early engagement with key stakeholders in industry to be able to, for them to be able to demonstrate the value proposition to the broader industry.
No. I think maybe just to add something a little different from, I guess, the perspective we have thinking globally, and maybe contrasting to the reality in Australia and New Zealand, in thinking of the sorts of production systems in, the Horn of Africa, South Asia, etc. What we are working towards, and we make grants to do this, is thinking of how, not to say it's the only solution, but one key driver can be development finance institutions. So if we have, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, EFAD, etc., making loans or grants, concessional loans or grants to governments, how can the tools that we're developing and the data sets that we're supporting be kind of scaled through those operations, which can be in the orders of hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of time? And we see that as an important lever to get kind of methane mainstreamed into livestock and rice also development. And then the more data we have and the more evidence we generate on the impacts of implementing those good practices on methane, that aids us in the climate finance conversation. So when you have Green Climate Fund or Global Environment Facility type projects looking for a mitigation outcome, there's more evidence to support those projects and the pipeline of Green Climate Fund projects. And then even in some of those markets that you might describe as being relatively low level of productivity, where you have multinationals sourcing liquid milk, for example, we're also jointly working with companies to take feed libraries, take the kind of ration balancing idea, and with the resources of the companies, help build the libraries for that market of interest to them. And the intention is progressively we're covering enough different production systems so that the information is relevant to others that have similar characteristics. So you can at least make a reasonable start in many places based on the information you're collecting in a few places, the kind of analogous systems, you might think.
Okay, there's a suite of questions here. I must have missed something in maybe a previous panel, but like people got real interested in stacking technology. So it's an important question to ask. Actually, I think the individuals on this panel are uniquely positioned to not only answer it, but to potentially help make it happen with multiple portfolios, investments across different technologies, the platform for collaboration between academia and multiple entities, and then the Global Methane Hub having the flexibility to work across so many different institutions, including private companies, government, academia, what have you. Why are we not driving on? Why are we not driving on researching the stackability of these technologies? And is there anything in the pipeline now? And is there any pull from you all to help drive that from either your portfolio companies or members?
Yes, it's actually remiss of me not to mention our stacking projects. Lucky everyone in Australia is asleep. Hopefully they didn't watch that online. So we have just released an expression of interest for a research call for stacking. And that is asking for collaboration from different partners, and will develop research to measure and monitor the impact of stacking in commercial operations. So that is a big focus of the CRC. We've started with livestock and methane, and there was a literature review done by the team, and now this expression of interest is out, and we'll do a similar literature review on stacking in cropping systems in the next 12 months. Why is it not being, it's just so difficult and expensive to measure, right? When you have multiple strategies, and particularly if it's genetics, plus a feed additive, the time horizons of those interventions are so different. So it does get complicated, but is certainly a big part of the next step for the CRC with projects.
I guess I know that there is some stacking work being considered in New Zealand, and including through the Ag Emissions Centre. And we are thinking about that across our portfolio and how do they stack together, including with the way that we invest. But, why hasn't more happened is there's not a whole lot of things that have been, complete and verified and validated in their own right, let alone able to be stacked with something else. But there's a lot of theory that can be applied to it, and certainly modelling done, and, forecasting what emissions progress might be. We have, something called the eco pond in New Zealand that sits outside, I guess, of the cow enteric methane. That's something that is easily stackable if you can also have a feed additive or something else going on. There's a lot of theory that can be applied there, but until we actually have these things in their final formulations, they've passed their regulatory approval, they're in the final, ready for farmer version, then it's hard to do too much on the stacking as well.
Yeah, maybe not to repeat the very good points on the stacking of the technologies, but just to, I guess, reiterate what I mentioned, that we are stacking practices, right? And thinking about what would be the lowest cost, highest kind of leverage intervention to make a start to raise productivity, reduce emissions intensity, combining nutrition, health, genetics, feeding, whatever it is, and really understanding the economics of that, right? How to make that work. And then another example of stacking, I guess, is with some of the low methane genetics projects, we're stacking methane on community-based breeding programs. So it's genetics and genetics, but it's building on existing work to raise the genetic merit of goats, sheep, cattle, whatever. And then where there are opportunities to make progress, where there's a willingness to make progress, add in the phenotyping work for methane, so that progressively those very good activities in low-income countries can actually get a head start on the methane question as well. And in some cases, those animals are, sending raw material into very high-value markets. And so we're also interested in how the end not consumer, but the retailer of those high-value products can help drive some of those sorts of practices, which would be genetics, ideally, but also on top of good rangeland management and good animal health and other things. Yeah.
Great. I've got one last question, and I don't know, it's answering if you'd like or not. And it really is for your organizations, how are you looking at the integration and application of artificial intelligence, I'm not going to say AI, I don't want to confuse anybody here, with either the technologies you're investing in or its applications to research?
I'll just say it's something small, and then Hayden, you can take over. I just know that the capability to do a lot of modeling of molecules and interactions, that there is certain, and what will compounds do, is really interesting, and some of our portfolio companies are certainly leveraging a lot of AI capability for that purpose, and including in the molecule discovery space as well.
It's limited. One area where there's probably more opportunity that we've talked about is whole of farm modelling and different, particularly in our grazing systems, our extensive northern grazing systems, being able to model more accurate baseline emissions from pasture quality, breed of animal, weight, like other data. So some application there that's been discussed, but it's limited in the methane space at the moment that I'm involved in. Anyway, Charles?
Yes, the screening approach, we are funding some work at Iowa State University to look at the AI approach to maybe screen for compounds. But it does rely on having good empirical understanding of what you're screening for, but certainly it's an option. And I guess the other area, and Ermias will recognise this from recent discussions we had with the Aim for Scale initiative, which the AI in that context was helping us manage and access and draw on large data sets, right, and make that an easier job. It doesn't replace the need for good quality data sets to underpin, but can agent-based kind of data management help us and be more efficient to find the best data to answer a given query that a producer or extensionist might have. So always focus on good data, please, but maybe we can be more efficient in how we access that using AI.
I think the classical data framework of garbage in, garbage out still applies. So if you all join me in thanking our panelists, Ruth, Claire, Hayden, very much.